Yesterday's video was not great. Had some issues with network, but I left it there because there were some things said, especially towards the end, that I wanted to keep. I'm looking at Jesus not long before he was due to die. In fact, there's a couple of things that happened to him, which I'm going to read about. I just want to look into when in the temple back in the day, the, the the lamb would have to be perfect. And the sacrificial lamb represents Jesus, because the sacrificial lamb was a sacrifice for the sins of the nation. In fact, Jesus was a sacrifice for the sins of the world in all ages. But it had to be a lamb without blemish, so they would take several months preparing, as it were, preparing this lamb. And in fact, they would keep inspecting it all the time, and they would put perfume on its ankles and parts of the body of that lamb as a kind of a symbolic preparation. So what I'm about to read, if you bear that in mind, it's very extremely relevant and has a lot to, and you'll notice the perfume as well. Now let's just read this. So I want to look at it's Matthew chapter 20. Where am I now? 26. Jesus anointed at Bethany. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. Now, what surprises me about these couple of these passages I'm going to read is the sort of nonchalance with which they approach Jesus' miracles. They say, he previously had leprosy, and then carry on the story. But I mean, this guy had leprosy, okay? If I've seen a video with someone with leprosy, I mean, her fingers were all filled with pus, half of them were missing, her toes were all missing, she was a mess. I mean, so to be healed of leprosy, I mean, that is a huge issue in itself. But anyway, let's carry on. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it over his head. So there's several things there. So we've got this alabaster jar. Well, alabaster is a kind of material, kind of a stone. It makes a nice creamy finish. And you imagine this sort of lovely round thing with a rim, so, and this thing's filled with perfume. I don't know how big it was. I imagine it's probably sort of 2 hands worth size, filled with expensive perfume. So imagine you get this, Givenchy or Givenchy in French, a perfume that costs like 50 or 60 quid, and pour it over his head. It's a lot of money. So that's what she was doing, and she didn't spare. So anyway, and poured it over his head. So imagine that you got all of a sudden you're sitting there eating, and all of a sudden someone comes in and pours stuff all over your head. And it's just coming down. So, but Jesus knew what was going on. It's as if he knew it was already going to happen, because the disciples were all saying, "Oh, he could have spent that money on the poor and this and that," and they were indignant. But Jesus, aware of this, he replied, "Why criticize this woman? Why criticize this woman for doing such a thing to me? You will always have the poor with you, but you are not always with me. She's poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." I'm telling you good news. I'm telling you the good news, which means the gospel of Jesus Christ, all about him and his sacrifice, and he says that she's preparing him for burial. And remember what I was saying at the beginning about the sacrificial lamb that had to be without blemish at all. And Jesus was perfect, 100% man, 100% God, never sinned. So he was the perfect sacrificial lamb for all time. There are other occasions where this happens, but I'm not going to read them all. But we have another occasion where this lady who probably was a prostitute, but hadn't believed in Jesus and started to change, had probably given it up. So, let me read this. One of the Pharisees, I won't go into that, but one of the Pharisees asked Jesus to have dinner with him. So Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat. When a certain immoral woman from that city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. This is a different woman to the one earlier. The one earlier, more than likely, was Mary, who's the brother of Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead. The sister of Lazarus. Then she knelt behind him at his feet. So behind him at his feet, you're imagining that, and you can't see how she would reach his feet. But in fact, they would normally be eating reclined on kind of couches, so his feet would be there, and she could be like this way behind, like that, and reach his feet. She knelt behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wipes them off with her hair. Then she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. So again, we got this perfume. It represents quality, it represents perfection, it represents the aroma of Christ, which is, if you're being saved, the smell is so wonderful, and your heart is being softened and changed. And she's crying. Why is she crying? Okay, well, she's probably feeling the conviction for her sin. She's probably feeling a love for Jesus that God put on her. That's like, it's impossible to love Jesus. It's impossible to love God because of our sinful nature. Yet He gives us the ability to. And he goes on, as when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he went on to say that, doesn't he know what kind, if he was a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is. But Jesus answered his thoughts. Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say to you. Go ahead, teacher. Then Jesus told him this story. A man loaned money to many people, 500 pieces of silver, etc. He goes on to say, someone owed 500, someone owed, a smaller amount, and someone else owed a smaller amount. Who do you think would be the most grateful? And the guy says, well, it'll be the guy that owed the most. And then Jesus said, yeah, he who is forgiven much loves much. So this woman, she'd be forgiven so much. She loved him so much. So that can happen to us. We're forgiven and set free. And we just can't stop loving Jesus. So that name to us means so much. Means so much forgiveness. So. I now want to pray for you that want to be born again, so you just believe in your heart that Jesus died and that God raised him from the dead, confess with your mouth that he is your Lord, is now going to be your King and Master, and just turn away from sin as this woman did, and that he'll help you. It can not be easy at times, but and loving Him sometimes comes and goes. But remember how much you've been forgiven, even if it's little, you've still been forgiven that. And in fact, if you think about it, it's probably a lot, underneath the surface that is there that needs forgiving. So I just want to pray for you. Pray for that person, they'll be able to do it, to take that step for God, and you completely, totally rearrange their life and all their situations. And I pray for that, for revival here in Europe and in connected countries, historically connected, including USA, including Canada, Australia, and those places, and some, these African countries and Asian countries, all these, and the South American countries that are historically connected to Europe, and so I pray for revival, I pray for a waking up, billions being born again, and I thank you, my God, that is what is about to happen. There's someone whose joy is held back because of blood. I don't understand what that means. You know what it means, but there's somehow something to do with blood that has crippled their life. And I give it to God. He knows about it. He's forgiven it, and He'll turn it around. So God bless you today.